What if the woman everyone mocked at the party was the one signing their checks tomorrow? They laughed at her dress, her silence, her presence. They called her a joke, but she didn't need to speak. Because the moment they learned her last name, the room stopped breathing, and what happened next changed everything. The marble floors of the Ashbourne estate glistened under chandeliers, worth more than most homes. And as Elena Hayes stepped through the grand archway, the air shifted. Not because she commanded attention, but because she didn't. Her dress was navy, simple, tailored but modest. No shimmer, no label, no noise. Her hair was pinned back neatly, her makeup soft, understated, like everything about her presence. She walked alone through a sea of silk and diamonds, where every heel clicked like a declaration, every smile was currency, and every glance came with a judgment. A woman near the champagne tower leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Did catering start letting their staff drink now?" The friend giggled. Elena heard it. She always heard it. But she didn't flinch. She made her way to the bar and waited quietly, while the bartender served two couples who had arrived after her. When he finally turned to her, she said, "Just water, please." The bartender blinked. Are you with the staff?" "No," she said politely, "just thirsty." He handed her the glass without another word. Behind her, a man in a velvet tux leaned into a group and said, "There's always one guest who missed the memo." More laughter. Elena turned slightly, eyes scanning the crowd. Laughter on lips, pride in postures, people mistaking their wealth for worth. She didn't interrupt. She didn't explain. She simply sipped her water and kept standing. Someone brushed past her shoulder without apology. Another bumped her arm and didn't look back. She was invisible in a room designed to make others feel large, but she had been here before. Not this estate, not this crowd, but this energy. And it always played the same way. Ignore, belittle, smirk, assume, until the moment it didn't, until the moment the mirror shattered, and someone realized they hadn't just mocked a stranger. They'd mocked the future owner of everything they were trying to impress. A waiter passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, offering them to every glittering guest in the circle. But when he reached Elena, he shifted the tray away without eye contact, assuming she wasn't one of them. She noticed, said nothing, and stepped aside. The laughter nearby grew sharper. A woman in a backless gold gown tilted her head and said, "I almost wore that same dress to bed last night." Her friends laughed, not because it was funny, but because cruelty in that room was currency. Elena gave her a soft smile. Comfort is underrated. The woman blinked, not sure if she'd been insulted. "And who are you here with?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "I didn't see your name on the list." "I was invited," Elena replied. "By whom?" "The valet." The circle laughed harder this time. A tall man with slicked back hair sipped his bourbon and added, "Maybe she's here to observe how the elite behave." "Some kind of social experiment if it is," another said. "She's definitely collecting data on arrogance." They all laughed except Elena. She didn't look wounded. She didn't flinch. That bothered them more. "What's your name again?" the woman asked, condescension dripping. Elena. Hayes. The name meant nothing to them yet. "Well, Elena Hayes," she said mockingly. "The powder room is down the hall, if you need a moment to adjust. Whatever this is." She waved her hand at Elena's outfit. "Thank you," Elena said simply, then turned to walk away. A phone rose behind her. Snap. A photo. A caption being typed, "That one guest who doesn't belong." Elena walked toward the garden doors, the laughter fading behind her. She had come alone. Yes, she had come quietly, Yes, but she hadn't come unaware. Every insult, every assumption, every smirk, she was counting them, not because they hurt her, but because soon, very soon, they would haunt the people who said them. The dining hall doors opened with a soft chime, and the crowd flowed in like silk, directed toward long candlelit tables, adorned with crystal, gold-trimmed menus, and name cards hand-lettered in calligraphy. Except Elena's. She paused near the far end, searching quietly, one hand trailing the edge of the tablecloth, eyes scanning for her seat, but it wasn't there. A hostess in black stepped forward briskly, clipboard in hand, lips pursed. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Elena said calmly. "I believe my name is missing." The woman raised a brow, scanned the clipboard, then smirked. "And you are?" "Elena Hayes." A pause, a blink, a quiet laugh. "There's no Hayes on this list." Guests nearby turned to listen. "I was invited," Elena said. The hostess looked her up and down slowly. "By whom?" "Someone from staff." "No. Then I suggest you check with the kitchen." The woman's voice wasn't loud, but the silence it created was. Conversations halted. Glasses stilled mid-air. A man at the head table leaned toward the hostess and whispered with amusement, "Did she sneak in security?" The hostess called, almost cheerfully. 2 guards appeared from the corner. Elena didn't move. "There must be a mistake," she said softly. "There is," the hostess replied. "You're at the wrong event. Actually." "Ma'am, this is a private function," one of the guards interrupted, already stepping forward. Elena turned slightly, not backing away, but not resisting. "Please don't touch me," she said, voice still calm. Cameras lifted, phones tilted. Someone recorded with a grin. The hostess nodded to the guards. "She can sort it out outside." One took her arm. Not violently, but firmly. Gasps fluttered around the room, not out of empathy, but out of amusement. Elena looked at the crowd. Dozens of faces, all dressed in finery, all staring at her, as if she had soiled their linen with her presence. The man in the velvet tux from earlier leaned back and said loudly, "You'd think someone who crashed a billionaire's dinner would try a little harder with the outfit." Laughter exploded. Elena didn't speak. She allowed herself to be guided toward the doors, her heels quiet on the marble, her shoulders unshaken, her breath even. Behind her, a woman whispered, "She'll be TikTok famous by morning." A man muttered, "I almost feel bad." But no one stopped her. No one questioned it. No one wondered what they had just done. Until the next moment, when the doors behind her swung open again, and everything they thought they knew unraveled in a single name. Before the guards could take another step, the doors behind them burst open with a gust of cold air, and a ripple of gasps swept through the room like thunder beneath silk. A man in a charcoal suit, face sharp with power, eyes narrowed in disbelief, stepped into the hall with purpose. It was Jonathan Price Hayes, billionaire industrialist, owner of the estate, and the man whose name everyone in that room had either profited from or worshipped. He stopped when he saw Elena. The guards froze. The hostess blinked. The guests turned in slow confusion. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, voice like a blade. The hostess hurried forward, nervous now. "Sir, this woman wasn't on the list. We thought." "You thought what?" he snapped, stepping past her. "That you could lay hands on my goddaughter." The room went silent. The hostess turned pale. The guards stepped back as if burned. Elena stood still, eyes steady, the same grace in her spine. Jonathan walked up to her, pulled her into a brief, protective hug, then looked over her shoulder at the crowd. "She is not a guest," he said. She's family, and if even one of you laid a finger on her. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. People were already shrinking in their seats. I asked her to be here, he continued, and I made the guest list. So if she wasn't on it, you screwed up. The hostess stammered. I'm so sorry. We didn't realize. No, Jonathan said, voice flat. You didn't bother to ask. He turned to Elena. Are you all right? I'm fine, she said quietly. Just a little. Scene. Murmurs grew. Someone dropped their fork. The man in the velvet tux whispered, Hayes, Hayes, Hayes. And then it hit them all. Elena Hayes. The name they had mocked. The face they had ignored. The woman they had laughed out the door. Was the sole heir to one of the most powerful fortunes in the country. The man who had insulted her tried to speak, but no sound came. The woman in gold sat frozen, her drink shaking slightly in her hand. Someone in the back whispered, I think that's the girl who owns half the East Coast. Jonathan turned back to the crowd. I suggest you all take a hard look at yourselves. You didn't judge her because she was rude. You judged her because she was quiet, because she wasn't screaming her wealth like the rest of you. He turned to Elena again, softer now. Come, let's sit. She didn't say a word. She walked past the stunned guests, head high, through the same doors that had moments ago been closed to her. And this time, every eye followed, not with contempt, but with fear, because now they weren't looking at a stranger. They were looking at the woman who could decide if their names ever appeared on another guest list again. Gasps hadn't yet faded when Jonathan raised his glass and tapped it once, sharply and final. The music stopped mid-measure. The servers halted mid-step, and the room turned toward him like children who knew they had gone too far. Since we're all being honest now, he said, his arm resting gently behind Elena's chair, let me clarify something you should have all known before tonight ever began. He glanced at Elena, who sat still, untouched by the performance, radiating a kind of silence that now commanded everything. This estate, this event, this legacy. It's all being passed on. I've spent a lifetime building Hayes International, but my time is nearly done. And there's only one person in this world I trust with everything I've created. He looked directly at Elena, and for a heartbeat, she blinked. As of last month, the entirety of the Hayes fortune, every account, every property, every board seat, was transferred to this woman right here. Not because she's blood, not because she asked, but because she carries what none of you here tonight seem to recognize: character. A breathless silence hung like fog. Someone let out an audible gasp. A fork clattered to the floor. A woman in designer heels leaned into her husband and whispered, "She owns everything." Jonathan nodded once, as if reading their thoughts. Yes, everything. And if you mocked her, ignored her, humiliated her, don't bother texting me tomorrow, because I won't be answering. Phones buzzed silently in pockets. The influencers who had filmed her humiliation earlier now stared at their screens, watching their careers unravel in real time. The man in the velvet tux tried to raise his hand. "Mr. Hayes, if I may." "You may not," Jonathan said without looking at him. "You've said enough." All eyes were on Elena now, the same eyes that had rolled when she walked in, that had laughed when she asked for a seat, that had dismissed her because her presence didn't scream importance. "Why didn't she say anything?" someone whispered. Elena finally spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "Because I wanted to see who you were when you thought I was no one. And now, I know, no one laughed, no one dared." The same video that had humiliated her earlier was now being shared again. But this time, with a new caption, "The billionaire you just insulted." And as those who had spent their lives chasing power now watched it leave their grasp in the form of a quiet woman in a navy dress, the truth landed like a final verdict. Wealth doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it walks in softly and remembers everything. The fallout began before dessert was served. One by one, guests slipped away from the table to check their phones in frantic silence, only to find headlines already spreading like fire. Heiress humiliated at Hayes Gala. Video sparks outrage at billionaire estate. The woman they mocked now owns it all. Elena sat still, her back straight, her eyes steady, while the same people who laughed at her now avoided even breathing too loudly. Across the room, the hostess who'd ordered her removal was being quietly escorted out. Not by security, but by the estate's director of events, who whispered, "Mr. Hayes said you're never to set foot here again." She didn't argue. She knew. The influencer who posted the original video tried to spin it, opening a live stream to apologize. But it was too late. Her sponsors dropped her mid-sentence. Screenshots of her mocking caption were now circulating under the hashtag, "Elena deserves better." Her comment section turned to ash. "This is who you really are," one post read. And the world saw it. In the corner, the man in the velvet tux attempted to slip out unnoticed, only for Jonathan himself to stop him at the door. "You're a board member at Hayes Financial, aren't you?" The man nodded slowly, sweating. "Not anymore," Jonathan said coldly. "I don't trust cowards." The man opened his mouth, closed it, and left. Status gone, reputation shattered. Meanwhile, PR firms flooded the estate's line with damage control offers. "Shut it all down," Jonathan told his assistant. "No one spins this but her." He gestured to Elena, but she didn't want to spin. She wanted the truth, and the truth was already delivering justice in real time. In the kitchen, the young waiter who'd tried to quietly offer her water earlier was asked to step into the hall. Elena met him there. "I remember you," she said. "Thank you," he stammered, unsure what to say. She handed him a card. Full scholarship to the Culinary Institute. Tuition, housing, mentorship. Yours. You treated me like a human being. That's rare. His eyes welled with tears. "I just did what was right." "Exactly," she said. "And now you'll do more." By the time the event ended, half the guest list had vanished in shame. The other half sat silent, unsure whether to grovel or run. Elena didn't scold them. She didn't need to. Their own reflections were punishment enough, because the woman they had mocked now held their futures in the palm of her hand. And she hadn't even raised her voice. The next morning, sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of the estate, but the echoes of the previous night hadn't faded. They had settled into every corner, like a quiet revolution. Elena sat on the back terrace, the same navy dress folded beside her, hair tied loosely, sipping tea as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Her godfather walked out with a folder in his hand, but she waved him off gently. "Later," she said. "I have something else to do first." 2 hours later, she stood outside a small apartment building across town, pressing the buzzer labeled R. Navarro. The young waiter opened the door, stunned, his apron still dusted with flour. "Miss Hayes, Elena." She smiled. "You start at the Culinary Institute in 2 months. They're expecting your call." He froze. "I never thought I know," she said. "But you looked me in the eye when no one else would. You handed me water without judgment. You didn't ask who I was. That's exactly the kind of person I want in a kitchen that feeds hearts, not just mouths." His voice cracked. "My mom's going to cry." Elena laughed softly. "Then tell her it's okay to cry." She raised a good man. Later that week, the institute made an announcement a new scholarship fund had been created. The Quiet Grace Fellowship, named in Elena's honor, is reserved for hospitality workers who showed compassion when no one was watching. Hundreds applied. Dozens were accepted. And it was only the beginning. Back at the estate, Jonathan handed Elena a list of calls from former friends, investors, influencers, people begging for second chances. She scanned the names once, then slowly set the paper on fire, watching it curl and vanish in the breeze. If they only respect me after they learned my name, she said. They never respected me at all. One older woman, however, had sent a handwritten note. She'd been the only guest who had quietly smiled at Elena that night, offered her a napkin when no one else had. Elena invited her to tea. They spoke for hours, not about money, but about books, family, grief, and hope. When the woman left, she hugged Elena and whispered, "You remind me of the kind of daughter I wish I had." Elena whispered back, "Thank you. You reminded me not everyone in that room was rotten. Kindness didn't need a spotlight. It just needed to be remembered." And Elena would never forget. The room was quiet, but the world was listening. Elena stood before the podium in a deep green dress. Simple, strong, nothing flashy. Her presence grounded like a storm that had already passed, but left the sky permanently changed. Behind her was the new banner, Hayes Foundation for Human Dignity, and in front of her, reporters, students, policymakers, and everyday people who had seen the viral clip that turned a private humiliation into a public reckoning. She didn't raise her voice. She never had to. "Last week," she began, "I walked into a room full of powerful people and was treated like I didn't belong. Not because of what I said, not because of what I did, but because of what I wore, because I wasn't loud, because I wasn't shining, and that was enough for them to decide I was less." The room didn't move. "But let me be clear," she continued. "I didn't want revenge. I wanted revelation. I wanted them to see themselves without their masks. And I wanted the world to see what happens when we confuse wealth with worth." Cameras clicked. People leaned in. My father built his empire not because he dressed the loudest or threw the biggest parties, but because he knew what it meant to listen, to look someone in the eye and value their humanity before their resume. That's the legacy I'm inheriting and expanding. She stepped away from the podium and walked across the stage to a tall board, displaying the foundation's mission: fully fund education, mentorship, and entrepreneurship for individuals misjudged by surface-level bias. People denied rooms they deserved to own. "From now on," she said, turning back to the audience, "we're not asking for a seat at your table. We're building new tables, tables that don't measure people by how they sparkle, but by how they show up when no one's watching." The applause didn't erupt. It unfolded, slow, reverent, building until it filled the hall with something deeper than noise. Respect. Elena didn't smile for the cameras. She smiled for the girl who had stood in that ballroom, holding a glass of water, while the world looked through her. That girl had not changed, but now the world would have to. A year later, the estate glowed with warm lanterns instead of chandeliers, soft jazz floating through the garden instead of orchestras, and laughter rising not from forced pleasantries, but from genuine joy. Elena walked among her guests, not high above them, not separate, but present, grounded, barefoot in the grass, holding a plate of plantain tarts made by the very same young man who once offered her water. He was now Chef Navarro, his culinary school diploma framed in the estate kitchen. This gathering wasn't a gala. It was a reunion of kindness. Teachers, bus drivers, nurses, artists, caregivers. People who had once been overlooked in rooms where status eclipsed substance. There were no name cards, no velvet ropes, just people eating under the same sky, seated at long wooden tables etched with the words, "Everyone belongs." A former custodian now ran the Foundation's apprenticeship program. A single mother who once cleaned houses sat next to a startup founder she mentored through Elena's initiative. Laughter mingled with the smell of home-cooked food. No one asked what anyone did for a living. They asked how they were doing. Elena stood quietly under the same archway where a year ago she had been stared at like a mistake. Now, she was surrounded by warmth, chosen family, and the kind of peace that comes from rewriting not just the narrative, but the rules. Jonathan raised a glass from across the lawn, and Elena raised hers back with a knowing smile. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration, not just of reputation, but of balance. No screams, no drama, just a woman who was once mocked for her silence, now surrounded by voices that finally understood what real wealth looks like. It had never been in the jewels. It had always been in the way people made others feel. And tonight, the estate overflowed with something the rich had failed to give her belonging. They laughed at her silence, laughed at her dress, laughed at the way she stood too calmly, too quietly, as if she didn't understand the room. But what they didn't know, what they never even thought to ask, was that the room belonged to her, that the land beneath their heels bore her name, that every insult they whispered was recorded not on a phone, but in memory, in stillness, in the patience of someone who never needed to defend herself, because the truth was already doing it for her. They thought she had no voice, but it was never about volume. It was about timing. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't to explain. It was to reveal. The woman they mocked didn't rise from their approval. She rose despite it, because dignity doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs one moment to be seen. And now, every door that once closed on her opens for those who look like her. Every table that once turned her away now bears her name. And every guest who once scoffed when she walked in now looks down when she passes. Because she didn't get even. She got free. And she took the future with her. They thought they stripped her of dignity. Instead, she stripped them of illusion. And as the world stood with her, not because she was rich, but because she was right, we were all reminded of something deeper. Kindness doesn't wear a label, and arrogance never lasts.